Welcome. My name's Christine Zako-Kanesh and I'm your chair for this webinar. Wheat is an important commodity to WA's economy and sowing time is a key factor on productivity and quality. In WA, growers traditionally sow in May, but they're seeking to sow progressively earlier. And look, there's a lack of knowledge on how currently available cultivars, wheat cultivars, respond to April sowings in Western Australia. It's my pleasure to introduce Brenda Shackley, my colleague and the lead of this research, which she asks the question, can current commercial varieties be exploited for early sowing? She'll be discussing just a snapshot of her research today, which she presented at the Agronomy Conference, Australian Agronomy Conference in 2017. And we'll have time for questions. So look, type them in the box and we can address them at the end of the seminar. And look, over to you, Brenda.
Thanks, Christine. I'd just firstly like to point out that this work is actually part of the Tactical Wheat Agronomy for the West project, which is co-funded by the department and GRDC. Now, Christine's really run through most of the background about how we want to push into April sowings and we have the lack of data. But there's also the thing that we know that maize dominates the area sown to wheat in Western Australia. But it's so high yielding, growers are really probably keen just to see whether we could throw the old rules of thumb out and whether maize could actually be sown earlier. And the other key factor for this research is that the older winter wheats that were previously examined were not really well adapted to Western Australian conditions. So we've had a few new changes, so have we got something in the pocket? Now, the trials that I'm going to talk about are actually from the 2015 and 2016 seasons. They were all rain-fed and they were sown through the area from Geraldton down through to Esperance. There were 12 cultivars used and they had a range of maturities from your winter wheats to the shortest one was, of course, maize. Now I'm going to start off with just looking at the grain yield, starting at north at Mullewa, and I'm just going to look at the 2016 data. Now what I've got here, if you follow my mouse, is that I've actually plotted this data looking at the grain yield versus the flowering date. And each of these dot points like we've got across here for maize is the time of sowing. So we're sowing mid-April, early May and late May. We have 5, I've just honed down the varieties, so we're only just looking at 5 varieties. So the Weyler, the Forest, the Cutlass, Magenta, and of course the Mace. Now what you notice here in the northern area is that really the highest yields are being achieved more at this second point, so the early May sowing times. And the other point that we can see here, that in 2016, the longer season, the spring wheat and the winter wheats just haven't performed well in this environment in 2016. But in 2015 there was a trial at Una and Forest did do well. Now we've got to remember that the 2016 was a long season. So if we just drop down now to Merredin, again 2016, and again we've got the same 5 varieties and the same sort of sowing times. Here we can see here that there's actually a bit of a different response where we've actually got the Cutlass and the Magenta actually performing the highest yielding at the early May sowing time, although not significantly at the, higher at the mid-April compared to the early May and particularly the late May. But here we see in this environment, the Forest has actually become competitive with the being sown at the mid-April sowing time. What you can see here is that Mace actually in this site wasn't competitive. So if we go further down south, Katanning, now this is the 2015 data, because in 2016 the trial was actually totally wiped, or nearly totally wiped out with frost. So I've just defaulted back to 2015, and what you'd notice here is that I don't have Forest in those trials, and we had Whistler instead of the Weyler, but basically they are very similar reacting winter wheat. You can see here at this cooler environment that again we've got the Magenta and the Cutlass performing well at the mid-April sowing time, similar to the early May sowing time, but we have the Whistler being competitive when it was sown at the mid-April sowing time. Now, as I pointed out, Katanning was affected by frost, and that's why you can see this dismal response to mace at this site. So roughly the the key points that I want to make with these 2 years of data is that foresters seem to be more robust for those mid-April sowings in Western Australia, while the winter wheats seem to be more suitable for the longer, cooler environment. So what I'm saying there is that, you know, the south of the Great Eastern Highway and the western fringes of the wheat belt. But the other important thing is that the current mid-long maturing cultivars, such as Cutlass and the Magenta, are showing good adaptation for yields when they're sown early in Western Australia. The thing is that it's not all about grain yield. There's also, we've got to keep in mind what's happening with the grain quality, and we've found within these trials, particularly up at Mullewa and then down at Esperance, is that there are issues with early sowing. We do have staining problems in Geraldton and Esperance, and also at Katanning we did pick up a lot of frost distortion that would have downgraded the grain to feed. So with this thing in mind, and still the frost risk, there is still a need for the cultivar which is better suited for the April sowing opportunities in Western Australia. So that rounds it out, so thank you, and there's a couple of sites that you can get some further information. As I said, this is only a snapshot. Are there any questions?
Sorry, Brenda, I had myself on mute then. Look, thanks very much, Brenda. At this, what I was going to ask you is, well, before we get to questions, I understand you've got some data from 2017. Can you share some of that with us as well? Because it's been quite an interesting season this year as well.
Definitely. And as you probably all realise, it has been a bit of a difference. The first thing was we did have some early rain, but then it did tend to dry out for the environment. So if I just flow down, the only trial that we've actually got harvested is up in Christine's area, up in Mullewa. So, and I'd just like to point out too that these trials were actually irrigated to get the seed up and well and truly established. They weren't used any follow-up irrigation just to get it established. And you can see here, again in Mullewa, we've actually in 2017 we've actually got 5 sowing times. I've only shown 4 here. The middle one here is that we've actually gone for the early May, we've gone for the Anzac Day sowing, early May sowing time, and the later May sowing time. So we've basically just put another little piece of the puzzle in the front here, and you can see what basically we are seeing generally again up in that northern area a same sort of response where we're getting the peak yields at that early May sowing time. But the interesting thing with this year's data, even though it was so stressful at that start, is that we still do have the the Magenta and the Cutlass performing really quite well, but we've also got Forest now coming back into the picture, and unbelievable, we also have Wedgetail, which was yielding the same as Cutlass in that early start. So this shows an interesting picture. The other interesting story is that the mace, it hasn't been able to peak at that early May sowing time, and it is coming through still not quite competitive even at that late May sowing time.
Thanks, Brenda. You have also included long sword, I think, in that trial. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So there is a lot of interest about longsword. So I'll actually just divert back to why there's this interest in longsword, and I've got the complete data for the flowering dates at Katanning, and you can see here's longsword coming through here. Now I've just looked at, we've got the varieties here, and we've got actual flowering dates along here, and we've got the sowing dates going backwards through here. So we've got 13th of April, 27th of April, 11th of May, and the 29th of May. If we just focus on this early or the mid-April sowing time, you can see we've got Wedgetail, Forest, and Longsword through here. So it is basically a long maturing variety along with the Forest and the Wedgetail. And what's interesting with these sort of varieties is that they're flowering at the same sort of time as what the cutlass and the magenta are with the 11th of May sowing time. So they're classifying wedgetail is a winter wheat, forest is a spring wheat, and longsword they're saying is a fast winter wheat. And what you can see here is that basically why it's fast is that as the sowing time is delayed, it is getting progressively faster compared to the forest and the wedgetail. And what we've also found is that at maturity, it also is really quite rapid in haying off as well. So how did it go? We've only got the results at Mullewa, and you can see here, so basically the same slide that I showed before, and we've got longsword represented by the orange dots, and it was actually one of the highest yielding varieties at that Mullewa site at the mid-April sowing times and coming through to the Anzac Day, and even at the early May sowing time. And then you can see, like the wedgetail being the longer maturing, it is dropping off rather rapidly after that. So it has got a place, but as I've got in the points here, you've got forest, which is an ASW, and at the moment longsword has been released and it's currently a feed classification. So that's a little bit of a downer, but anyway, it is looking competitive and an interesting variety.
Thanks, Brenda. That's great. Look, just reminding everyone just to send your type your questions in the question box if you wanted to. But I do have one question here about flowering windows. That years ago, it says here discussion. Does this research help with understanding what flowering windows are for wheat?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because that's probably one of the, well, when these trials first started off, it was all about providing the opportunity to examine the longer maturing varieties in a different environment compared to MBT. But the other benefit of these is, because we're intensely doing all the flowering dates, is that we can now come back and review the old flowering windows that were done way back in the actual early 90s. So it has been quite a long time. So the key thing for that is that we need to look at yield and the actual flowering dates. So when are the maximum yields achieved and what are the corresponding flowering dates. And I've had a quick look back through from the 2015 and 2016 data, and you know, one of the things that Wal Anderson said that we do need to review that, because you know the change of the different varieties, and of course with these trials we're also putting the pressure on by providing a really long maturing variety. But it's actually interesting that the flowering windows are actually coming out to be pretty well, I mean pretty similar to what was what could you say, printed down like in the fact sheets and also in the wheat variety guide. They can jump around a bit, so like up north we have actually found that they've stayed fairly similar. So like last year the flowering window was about the 5th of April to the 5th of August to the 25th of August. So we were basically saying that the flowering window up there was probably the 11th of August to the 31st of August. Merredin, look, it's, you know, 1st of September to the 21st of September. So very similar, and again down in Esperance, again that was very similar dates as well. Katanning is a place where it's been jumping around. So because we've had the opportunity to push some of those longer maturing varieties earlier, and in 2015 they weren't frosted, so the window came earlier. Last year they were severely frosted, so the window got pushed way back. So there can be a bit of movement like that, but I was actually pleasantly surprised that many of the other sites we're actually seeing a very similar sort of flowering window.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Brenda. Look, we haven't actually got any more questions to ask at this point, so time to draw it to a close. Look, thanks everyone for joining us. Brenda works at the Katanning office of Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, and we'll be publishing these current data into the updates into 2018. So look, thanks very much for everyone joining us. And
sorry, Christine, I missed that.
Oh no, I was going to say thanks everyone for joining us, and it's thanks very much for your time. Have a great day. Bye.